Our group did the effects of volcanic activity on the life on Earth and the Earth itself.
Our first claim is how volcanic activity led to mass extinctions. The end Permian extinction occurred about 252 million years ago. One major cause of this extinction was activity in the Siberian Traps, a volcanic region in Siberia. The activity could have released toxic gas into the atmosphere, either from the rifts themselves or from rocks that melted when the lava touched them. It may also have raised air and sea temperatures and acidified the ocean. About 70% of land species and 96% of marine species went extinct within an extremely short period of time. The volcanic activity began about 300,000 years before the actual extinction, and the extinction itself may have taken as few as 60,000 years. The eruptions could have continued for as long as 500,000 years after the end of the extinction. The end Triassic extinction occurred about 200 million years ago. While it's not entirely clear what caused it, volcanic activity is a likely factor. A region called the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province released huge quantities of gas and lava over about 40,000 years, beginning at the same time as the extinction. This is a very short time period on a geological scale, and so much volcanic activity happening so quickly could have caused rapid climate change and atmospheric changes. The extinction killed about 76% of all species living at the time, and the recovery was slow because of the amount of carbon dioxide that had been released into the air. The end Triassic extinction opened the door for the evolution of the dinosaurs, who roamed the Earth for the next 135 million years. This evidence highlights how devastating volcanic activity can be to life on Earth. These are some of the biggest extinction events ever, and they had huge and catastrophic effects on the inhabitants of the planet.
Volcanoes don't just kill animals, they also create landmass for land-based organisms. For billions of years, volcanoes have shaped the surface of Earth. A large portion of the land on Earth is the result of volcanic eruptions and molten rock that was spewed out of the mantle, forming large bulges and creating elevation differences. These elevation differences eventually became solid land that was out of the water when oceans formed. This process has slowed down recently, but may ramp up in the next 100,000 years as the result of a super eruption of the Yellowstone volcano in the Rockies. The flow of lava will cause all of the surrounding wildlife to die, and it will also create a large sheet of new volcanic rock. This volcanic rock is usually coated in a layer of ash. This coating of ash is an incredibly nutritious food source for plants and contains many essential minerals and elements that plants regularly need. Ash can also be spread extremely far from the site of an eruption and can kill plant life that may have taken over in certain areas. On top of the dense organic matter that is created as a result of volcanic eruption, the ash also leaves behind minerals like sodium, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, silicon, phosphorus, calcium, and iron, all of which are minerals that plants need. This increase in mineral concentration in the soil promotes the growth of life in places that were too harsh to sustain life. The lack of life in both once highly populated areas and other areas that were completely void of life means that new species have the ability to take over, and natural selection is able to happen much faster because there is a more competitive ecosystem for plants and animals. However, if the ash from the eruption is too acidic, then it will make the area inaccessible to plants and by extension all life. We chose to use the fact that volcanoes change the landmass and the landmass changes the ecosystem to show how Earth has changed over time due to volcanoes. This is because when the balance of life is thrown out of order by a change in land and a change in the quality of living conditions in certain areas, it changes the Earth as well. On top of the physical landmass, the increase in soil richness also makes it possible for more plants to grow on land. The roots and leaves from these plants stop soil erosion, make dirt, reduce carbon dioxide, and change their surroundings. This change in surroundings results in an overall change in the planet as a whole.
Our third claim is that volcanic activity changed atmospheric and oceanic compositions. The Earth's first atmosphere is thought to have been formed 5 billion years ago. This atmosphere was made of only hydrogen and helium, which were the two most common gases in the universe when the planets in the solar system were forming. For many years, while the Earth was still very small, solar winds constantly blew the gases around, not allowing them to collect. Once things had begun to settle down, the gases collected. The high heat of the Earth led to the constant volcanic eruptions. The eruptions released gases from the mantle into the atmosphere. Volcanic outgassing resulted in the introduction of carbon dioxide, water vapor, nitrogen, methane, as well as some other deadly gases. There was still very little oxygen in the atmosphere because plants had not yet photosynthesized. In the early atmosphere, oxygen only appeared when the sunlight split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Once Earth had cooled enough, the water vapor in the air condensed, which caused rain, resulting in the creation of the oceans. This evidence explains how the major elements in our atmosphere today were introduced through volcanic outgassing. Gases such as carbon dioxide and nitrogen were released from the mantle during eruptions, creating an atmosphere that can sustain life once oxygen is added. The evidence also lets us see how the water vapor was introduced, eventually allowing for the creation of the oceans, resulting in life being able to form, evolve, and grow.
The Earth's first oceans were thought to have been formed 3.8 billion years ago. The cause of this formation of oceans was precipitation. Rain began to fall and collect, and eventually enough rain was collected to form the large bodies of water that covered the majority of the planet. Similar to the atmosphere, there was an abundance of carbon dioxide in the water, but very little oxygen. There continued to be a lack of oxygen until green cyanobacteria formed in the water. The cyanobacteria were the first photosynthesizers, introducing greater amounts of oxygen into the oceans. This oxygen diffused through the water and into the atmosphere. Eventually, this oxygen in the atmosphere allowed for the formation of the ozone layer, resulting in the movement of plant and animal life onto the land. The ozone layer allowed living creatures to thrive on land without the threat of deadly sun rays. The oxygen that was formed in the early oceans allowed for the evolution of life into what it is today. This evidence was chosen because the oceans provided a safe environment for life to grow and provided protection from the sun, which let organisms evolve.
Two other possible questions that are raised by this presentation could be, what species will be dominant in nature now, but were killed by volcanoes? This question is important because it would help scientists see the effect that volcanoes and extinctions had on the environment and ecosystems, and could reflect on what a human-based extinction might end up doing to the planet. The other question would be, how would humans survive a volcanic eruption based on previous evidence of what has survived and what has not? Using fossil records, humans would most likely be able to compile a list of species that would probably survive, and take species that were necessary for their survival underground during the event of an eruption. They could also try to use volcanic activity to generate power and use seeds to keep different species alive. This is obviously important because the human race would like to continue to exist on the planet rather than being wiped out by volcanoes. These are our works cited, and that's the presentation.